Okay, are we ready to start the meeting? Roll, please.
Eric Dowd,
Here.
Mark Mahoney,
Here.
Heather McDonald,
Here.
Jess Pedersen,
Here.
John Williams,
Here.
Kim McGee will be a little late. Meredith Bullock,
Here. Okay, consent calendar and approval of the Historic Preservation Commission meetings, minutes from the previous meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review them? Have there been any corrections, additions? No? There motion to accept the minutes as presented? Okay,
I'll second that.
okay, in favor?
Aye.
Aye, aye, laddie. Okay. Items from citizens present not on the agenda. Is anyone in person or online who would like to make a comment on that's not on tonight's agenda? Pretty quiet out there. Okay. Action items. The first thing on the agenda is 242 Main Street. This is a work session, and so it's very informal, but
Yeah,
Aaron?
if you guys want to swing on up, feel free. So we have some the applicants or the potential future applicants. So 242 Main Street, Forum Fi approached the town, wanted to prepare kind of a concept for a future application. And when we kind of looked at it, there were a few items that they wanted some initial feedback on from the town, specifically the Historic Preservation Commission, given the property's location right on Main Street. And so, Eric, as you said, this is a work session. This is not a courtesy review. We haven't received any formal application. The town staff has not done any review of the plans. And so really, I think what they're just trying to get is some feedback on some of the initial massing, architecture concepts. They have a few questions they'd like to get input from the Historic Preservation Commission on. So I'll kind of leave it up to you guys to kind of walk the HPC through your questions and design and go from there.
Great. How are we doing tonight? My name is Ryan Lee with Forum Fi Architecture.
Andrew Dillon, also with Forum Fi.
So the property that we're looking at is 242-256 Main Street. It's directly next to the Village Smithy. And we're here to really chat about a few different options for design as for an alternative compliance. So the first one being right now in the town, it's required to have a 14-foot height limit from the first floor to the second floor. And what we're looking to do is to reduce that to be 12-foot floor to floor while maintaining a 14-foot look. The other portion that we'd like to discuss tonight is a 42-foot height alternative compliance for the stair overrun and mainly for the elevator access to a rooftop deck and garden. So these are a couple renderings. I'll go back and forth. This one's looking at when we're standing kind of across the street from the Village Smithy, looking back at the building. Directly to the left here is the new bakery that was recently constructed. You can see the bakery here on the left for scale, and we placed this rendering of this building. The intent of this building is to have commercial on the main floor and on the second floor. Additionally, have 6 residential units, 2 of them, one being affordable housing, one being a resident occupied unit per the town of Carbondale. So the first request I really just would like to open this up to discussion too is that we're looking to reduce that height requirement floor to floor from 14 feet to 12 feet. We will maintain a 14-foot look on the exterior, which is happening a lot along Main Street right now, where a lot of these buildings actually have, you know, maybe a 12-foot ceiling, but they have a parapet. It makes it look like a 14-foot building. So we're able to achieve that, but with the density we're trying to pursue and to have access to the rooftop garden, it's challenging to have a floor-to-floor 3-story building with density. Any initial thoughts on that?
So why do you want to reduce it from 14 to 12?
So that we can create better floor to ceiling heights for all the residential units. You know, when you're at a 14-foot floor to floor minimum per the code right now, it gets challenging with a 35-foot height limit. You might end up with 8-foot ceilings or less.
Yeah. Isn't that just normal 8-foot ceilings? Residential stuff?
9 is a little bit more comfortable than 8.
The reason you're compressing it is to get that extra space, the community garden, basically, right?
That's part of the reason.
Good, if you went 14 feet and then 2 10-foot 6, 10-foot 6, you're at 35 feet, right? So if you compress that down by 2 feet, you can get a 9-foot, let's call it the penthouse going into the roof, accessing the roof.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is driven by having an elevator to have accessibility to the roof. You know, if we, without
So-
that,
So the question is, what is a community garden?
it'd be a rooftop that would be open to the public, say on First Fridays. We would have an ability to grow up there rather than just having a blank slate for a roof that's, you know, not accessible, not usable. You can see this kind of in these overall renderings here.
The idea is based on the concept of an urban garden, where rooftops are used for more than just mechanical equipment, things like that. You actually utilize that space to grow food, and in this case, with that overrun and the access, it actually becomes a community amenity instead of just being a kind of private access for the users of the building. The idea of an urban garden is a lot of it is based on trying to reduce the heat island effect. And traditionally buildings just plastered the roof with a material that gives off a ton of heat and is not all that hospitable. So it's trying to redefine that with a larger building in the town.
So the community garden will be for anybody a resident in town, or you're aiming for the people that are going to be living there?
It'd be for people that live there. We've discussed having it open on First Fridays. We really just haven't gotten that far. We would like, you know, some input before we really get into submitting this.
How does the public access that?
We have a main lobby off the front of the building. And that would be
Street?
off Main Street. That would be directly accessed via stair or elevator for full accessibility to that rooftop.
And wouldn't the 2 units on top also access that?
Yes.
Hmm.
I guess the biggest question here is, you know, the massing of this. Is this something that you would be in support of? We're looking for this element of the building here, instead of being 35 feet to be 42 feet. It's mainly driven by accessibility for an elevator. And that's really what we're looking for as far as some feedback. The second portion being dropping the floor system from a 14-foot floor to floor requirement to 12 feet while still maintaining a 14-foot look on Main Street.
So have you talked to the neighbors about this?
Yes,
Village Smithy people in particular?
we worked with Village Smithy, Charlie, for a while, and he's looking at redeveloping that himself. So we're very aware. This is new though. We haven't reached out directly, but we know what's going on over there.
Yeah, I did appreciate the shade modeling, but it does put a lot of shade on their yard and in their structure, which is part of their commercial operations. And a 35-foot level certainly is an advantage for them. So we have to look at this in not just this building, but the I guess the community setting that it's placed in. And for me, the crux of it in asking for the additional height is there a public benefit to allowing what essentially on the west side looks a 4-story building mass? And for it to be a public benefit, I think it has to be available to the public and not, and I would say available during the business occupancy hours of the building. And really for it to be permanent, there should be an easement that the owner is willing to give for public access to that top level. And in addition, you need ADA access, so an elevator would be required.
Yeah, that's the main portion of this being 42 feet.
Yeah.
Without the 42-foot alternative compliance, an elevator to the roof is almost impossible with a 3-story building.
Yeah.
And back to your original point about the amount of shade or sort of on the Smithy yard, by going to 42 feet, we actually reduce the overall height of the majority of the mass of the building. If we were to not get the 42 feet and go with the 35-foot height limit, it takes a majority of the building and actually pushes it up a couple feet.
Puts it what?
It increases, so if you go to the building section. So the 42-foot height limit applying to the elevator core and the stair core, which that's what provides the access to the rooftop, that actually takes the parapet wall around the rest of the roof and pushes it down in height. So by adhering to a 35-foot height limit, it would reduce our ability to do that overrun. So all of a sudden the roof does not have access and the rest of the building actually increases in height. The majority of the building increases in height, if that makes sense.
5 feet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the shading analysis, part of the point of providing that was to illustrate or demonstrate that by not going with an alternative compliance, which reduces the reason we're asking for it, there's no reason to reduce the height of the building. And so it goes back up to that maximum height limit.
And I think this section, really illustrates it's a small portion of the building. We're not talking about a 42-foot alternative compliance for the entire structure. We're talking about.
Unfortunately, that 42 feet is towards the front of the building.
Right.
It would be better if it were allowed to be towards the rear of the building.
The challenge there is providing realistic access from the street back to that core, which is the whole point of the core, is to provide an elevator access.
Yeah.
And so if you require someone to travel, let's say, 3/4 of the way through the building, all of a sudden it's not a great path.
Yeah, and to that point too, is like if it's part of the, approval process to be a public amenity, it would be challenging to say, go through half the building, go up the elevator through all these residences. If this elevator is located essentially off Main Street, it's a lot more accessible to everybody. Right, it's right there.
Well, it unfortunately doesn't show in the plans where the elevator is and the core. So it was hard for us to determine.
Yeah, that's fair.
That we saw the open set of stairs in the rear, which is, I guess, your second means of egress.
Correct.
But it was unclear as to where the public access to that upper level was.
Yeah, and that whole vertical access takes place right at that corner. And the idea, obviously, we understand the impact of coming down Main Street and having that taller portion located right at the front of the building. It's also meant to sort of demarcate the entrance to the building, the main entrance, and especially if we're going to consider that rooftop a public amenity, people should be able to find their way to that rooftop without having to navigate through the building. I think that's important.
So the zoning currently on the south side of Main Street requires you to step the building back a certain amount. And you're increasing that height on the second level. So you're in effect creating more shadow on the street than what was sort of created by the zoning.
Right. The intent of the zoning.
The
code is
intent
to
of the
step that-
zoning,
yeah,
exactly.
To step the building back.
Yeah, so are we still within a shadow study? Are we within that shadow line or have you exceeded it on Main Street?
Well, and that's something that I think we would be more than happy to provide to look at, like the shading analysis that we provided really focused on the Smithy, understanding that was, obviously that's an important thing, not just for them, but for anybody who goes and eats breakfast there. We've all done that. So we'd be happy to provide an analysis to see what sort of impact that taller mass has on the street. But to Ryan's point, if you look at the front elevation of the building, I mean, it's let's call it a 30% section of the building that actually goes up to that height. The rest of it is back down at the lower height, which again is actually lower than the allowable max height of 35 feet.
Now, the back side of that lot abuts medium density zoning.
Correct.
And it's my understanding that a certain amount of your project has to meet that height minimum or maximum height requirement. Have you looked into that? Because I think that's basically 2.5 stories.
So, and you're talking the medium density across the alley from our project.
Yeah, and I don't agree that it's medium density in
Right.
my opinion, but I'm aware of this abutting zoning. You have to step down to meet that zoning. And are you within that height limit as well?
I guess I'm not aware of that code section.
It's something to look into before you get too far into this, I
Okay.
think.
So I see on the site plan that you have the 2 doors. Is that supposed to be your main entrance or is it just the one single door with the plants?
Right now, that the main entry is that larger single door. The
Is-
2 doors, so the commercial space plan for the main level, the goal would be to have access directly off the sidewalk. And so the double doors displayed in the site plan, that's the access into the commercial space.
Okay, so it's just that's why you don't have a floor plan, so you don't know what kind of
Right.
programming is happening right there. So it's hard to tell like where you had the elevator, where you're putting your offices and commercial and where you're having the residences, because I would have expected you guys to do that on the inside next to the bakery and have the elevator and the core over there, so you wouldn't have the more of a step down on the side towards Smithy.
Yeah, we're trying to
Well-
open this up to the Smithy. Otherwise, we're just
Yeah.
having a blank facade going all the way to the Smithy. So opening that up, creating like an area that it feels that this is an entrance, that it's a community space that people feel welcome. I think if you do it the other way, which you can flip the building, but then you're just going to have a blank facade that's going to sit against the Smithy. So I think that's kind of just trying to make the massing work and actually respond to the Smithy's open lawn.
And understanding that most of the traffic coming to the building is actually coming from the west versus the east. And so locating an entrance to the building where most of the people are circulating from, just as an architectural wayfinding standpoint is much more desirable.
So I got a couple comments here. It's, about the historic, this building located in historic downtown area. You're in between two structures of merit buildings that are very historic. And the front design of this house, this project is nowhere near anything historic at all. Did you put any thought into trying to make this fit into the neighborhood a little better than such a very modern looking building?
We did. I think we incorporated, smaller mullions in the windows, the brick for the main level and the second level. I do think the massing is actually pretty appropriate to the historic nature of the town. If we look all the way down Main Street, many of the buildings are brick face facades. If we look directly across the street to the north, there's 3 brick buildings that are straight faced. So I think we're doing our best to make sure that we're incorporating some of that historic nature, but it's not a historic building. So it's trying to balance that, but we did incorporate that.
It would be nice if it looked a little more like it tried to fit into the neighborhood better. The height, the second we open up going above 35 feet, there's been a lot of developers that wanted to do stuff above 35 feet and they've been denied. The second we do that, we're gonna open up a floodgate to a lot of people wanting to raise that height, and Carbondale is really pretty steadfast on holding 35 feet. So other buildings have rooftop areas and gardens. No one's really come up with the idea of a community garden on the top of a downtown building, but they've got access to their roof and they held a 35-foot height. I don't really see any reason why this should be anything special.
I think it's all about accessibility. If we don't want to have it fully accessible, decision that, is driven by a lot of opinions, that's okay then. But we're trying to make sure that this is accessible for everybody. That's really the whole point of this 42-foot height limit.
Yeah, that's the problem. Going up beyond 35 feet is more than just public access to the rooftop stuff. It's something a lot of other developers have wanted to do and haven't been able to. I personally think that's a non-starter right there.
Well, I do think that providing ADA access, I get that other projects may have access to the roof, but ADA access is almost impossible at 35 feet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think
And
the other
so-
thing to note is that we're not trying to ask for a 42-foot height limit to develop a 4th story. We're not trying to gain more square footage, it's all about accessibility.
Yeah, but you're opening the door for others to do that.
I think it's gonna go on a case-by-case basis when it comes into the planning department.
And I wonder if opening the door for ADA accessibility, I guess the question is that actually a bad thing? I think that equal and fair access to certain amenities, especially things like rooftop gardens, I don't see that as a negative.
Well, the ADA has plenty of, our park space have plenty of ADA access to areas. There's one right there, half a block away from you also. They're all over town. You can get ADA access to the residential and commercial, everything else, but going up above 35 feet, you're going against the common desire of the community to hold 35 feet, so the maximum building height.
I just wonder if going through this process creates a public hearing, which brings out a lot of other comments. And if you want to go down that road, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
There's other impacts that people are going to come up with. And just by the virtue of having a public hearing to have a variance.
It's alternative compliance because it's in the code. So I just want to make that aware that it is in the code to go up to 42 feet.
With caveats.
Right.
Correct, but it's in the code.
Yeah, and I think we really should explore those caveats. Unfortunately, we don't have a staff report and we're not experts in the UDC, this is dealing with some significant zoning issues. But you're allowed 42 feet as an exception. And you'll have to ask for that exception. I did some homework because I'm not an expert at the UDC, and found some pretty interesting issues. Citations and citation numbers. 57.7.C.3 in no instance shall any architectural appurtenances, that's a word that I had to look up.
Appurtenances.
Is that how it's said? Or rooftop mechanical equipment, including those set forth in subsection I above, project above the mandatory sunlight and view protection step-down requirements per 57.7.C.1. And you go to that to allow sunlight during winter months and ensure a desirable building scale and preserve views. All buildings or portions of buildings located within the HCC district along the south side of Main Street shall comply with the following maximum height limits. And it goes 20 feet from the main street, or more than 20 feet, 35 feet. So this is saying there's no exceptions to, if I'm reading it correctly, to that instance. And we would like at some point to get a response from planning. But in addition, I found this little gem. Preservation of historic character within the commercial site and building design. This is 5.7.7 G3. When development is immediately adjacent to a historical structure of merit identified by the Historic Preservation Commission, of which the Village Smithy is, if deemed necessary by the approving authority to mitigate any adverse impacts to the historic structure, the approving authority may require building setbacks in excess of the minimum requirements as set forth in this code. Above ground setbacks of building facades in excess of the minimum requirements of this code, and or such additional development measures that are necessary to mitigate any impact to the historic structure of merit. So actually, if the authorities were to deem you need to mitigate measures, we could be reducing the height limitations as opposed to allowing them to exceed. So we're on a really slippery slope here. And I happen to agree with John that the codes were written to actually prevent any four-story structures occurring, especially on the south side of Main Street. And I think we have to come up with and this is my personal opinion, a better benefit for public use than a garden garden, rooftop garden at the upper levels.
Does that last section allow for reduction in height or just additional setback requirements?
Just height.
Height, not setback.
Well, this last passage has, everything's on the table in terms of mitigation requirement. Yeah, that's an that went through me. That's an interesting one. I think it's nice that it's in there for, on our side of the fence, you know.
What section is that?
Um,
Is that in the UDC, Eric? Where is that? In the
The
UDC?
UDC 5.7.7 G.3. Page
So it is.
228.
It is building setbacks.
Yeah.
So, you know, essentially what it's saying there is, you know, in order to respond to historical structure, the approving bodies could say a building above grade, maybe that second or third level may have to step back further so that it doesn't, you know, impact negatively that structure of merit on the adjacent property. It doesn't say it has to, it just says it could if you need to respond to impacts or adequately mitigate those impacts.
It does say any or such additional development measures that are necessary to mitigate. So it leaves it open-ended.
And so, you know, we staff did not go through and do any sort of zoning review. There's a lot of zoning sections that we would work through before a formal application comes back if you guys want to pursue this application. I think the goal of this meeting was really just to say, is there an appetite, if we can work through those zoning sections, the UDC, with the applicant and staff, for the potential for a 42-foot element on the building, if that 42-foot element allows for some sort of public rooftop access. In addition, is the architecture kind of in alignment with what the historic preservation feels is best for this site in this portion of Main Street? And then the third being, is there an appetite to consider a potential reduction of that 14-foot floor to ceiling requirement for commercial spaces on the ground floor along Main Street? And so, you know, I don't want to get bogged down necessarily in a lot of the details of the UDC, because there will be a formal historic preservation courtesy review as required by code if the applicant, or if Forum 5 decides to submit an application for this. And at such time, you would have a staff report, you would have a staff analysis, and a lot of this information would be brought up. But it's really just kind of discussing the concepts before they go through and spend time, money, effort, developing plans. If they hear that maybe there isn't support for one, two, or all three of those items, or there is support for one, but maybe with some additional caveats or considerations. And so, you know, I really encourage you guys to kind of focus your comments more on that element. And, you know, I think I've heard from a few of you that there were concerns about the 42-foot element and how that responds to a structure. I think I've heard a little bit about, I really haven't heard anybody have concerns or comments about the 14 to 12-foot difference. Could have misheard that, but that hasn't seemed like that's been something that the commission has been too concerned about. And then I have heard, you know, one or two comments about concerns on the architectural style fitting in with the overall Main Street character. So I don't know if there's other comments on kind of those three items, but that might help kind of give some direction back to the applicants or potential applicants on where to go next with this design concept.
So I think going from 14 to 12 feet is okay with me. You know, it's a block that really has no other 3-story buildings on it, nor are the existing buildings meeting that criteria. And I think we're stepping away from the center of town, and therefore maybe that can be relaxed a little bit. I do see that this building could be anywhere, and I want to see it be part of Carbondale. I want you to find something cool about Carbondale and put it in that front facade. It's not there now, whether it be brick treatments, corbels, or, whatever. I just don't see it right now. It feels like it could be in Avon or, and we do live in a pretty unique town, I think. And I think you need to just pick up on something that you find special in town, historic, preferably historic, commercial core, and work that in somehow to your design. And I think it is young. It's an infant at this point.
Yeah, we
And I
appreciate
think-
that feedback.
I think there's potential there.
Other comments?
I just have trouble accepting that the public will actually utilize the rooftop garden. Or even if you've said that it would be on first Friday, so that's, 12 hours a month.
Or is
That
it
the
gonna end up
public would be-
using
what's that?
for, or maybe it's end up using for private events? Is that what you're thinking of too?
We're open to ideas. I mean, we're not set on what it's gonna be used for.
But it's not publicly accessible
No, it would be. That's the point of this.
during
So
the day.
if I was a teenager, could I go up there and
Well, we'd have to sort through
Skateboard
those
and-
details. I mean, like, if
But you're asking for,
we're here with a concept and, I think that we're, to Jared's point, it's just trying to get some initial feedback. I don't have details of how we're gonna, regulate how people are going up there. We'd have to figure that out. We're here to have that conversation, but I don't want that to drive a yes or no. Like, it's part of what we're trying to have as a vision for downtown. I think it's a unique thing that we could bring to this
but
city.
if it's not publicly accessible to a great degree, then it's an amenity for the tenants of the building. And I don't think that, I mean, there's criteria for acceptance of alternative compliance, right?
Yep.
And I don't see where this thing, where the design is meeting it has to meet all 4 criteria, and I don't see where it's meeting that. Because, the results in benefit to the community that exceed benefits associated with the subject standard. I don't see it having a great benefit for the community. I see it as a nice amenity for the tenants. But unless, and you say it's details, but unless it has a publicly accessible time, place, and manner that is more than First Fridays, I don't see it reaching to the height of hitting these criteria. And I would not be in support of allowing the alternative compliances.
The average person's not gonna notice if it's
Right.
gonna be open. They're thinking, oh, it's an office building and there's residential above it. They're not gonna notice unless you have like an advertisement of something, maybe a cafe, rooftop cafe or something like that, that people can go up. Like all the hotels do, like the ones in Aspen.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think Kim brought up the Aspen Art Museum.
Yeah.
Which is a publicly accessible
Mhm.
spot with a rooftop that's publicly accessible.
Yeah, most people walking down the street are not gonna go up there. It sounds like it's gonna be a great lunch spot for all the people working in the commercial areas of the building.
I think the challenge here is to be able to balance providing full-time access to people. Obviously, if you do that, there's going to be the few that use it in a negative way. And so where Ryan's saying it's in the details, I think that means that the goal here is to make this as great of an amenity for the public as we possibly can. And if it doesn't quite meet the standards, then we've fallen short. But the goal is to make it, the goal is not to provide a rooftop deck for anyone working in the building. It's to actually provide an amenity for the community. And I think the unique nature of it, different from a park, is obviously its elevation above the ground, its view of Sopris, which is the greatest commodity we all have here. And there's details to work out. I think that you can't just allow free access at all times, but we can figure out a way to make this building work and work for everybody, or at least work for the most number of people possible. But if we're not allowed to do that, then it just becomes a rooftop deck for those that work and live in the building.
Eric, I did see Kim raised her hand online.
I don't see her.
Jeez. So I don't know, Kim, if you had a comment.
I do. Hi. I would say I'd like to see us concentrate less on this rooftop park and more on the mass and scale of the building itself. I feel like the way it looks right now doesn't settle into the historic downtown as well as it could. And I think that people of the town are going to flip over the size of this. And I'm wondering if it might help the part that is the 2-story with the brick and the multiple windows that's right up at the street. I'm wondering if it might help to not make that 2 stories and make it 1 story. You've got some interesting design elements, but I feel like there isn't a nod to historic downtown. It feels like it belongs in Willits to me rather than Carbondale. And so I'd love to see some more interesting design elements. And I just feel like it feels like this big hulk. It just feels too big the way it is. And I'm wondering if you could give it another pass. And I don't think that once we get into the code and some of these other things, which is not our job tonight, I think that height is a problem. But again, I'm more interested in looking at it, even looking at it, how it sits in between the smithy and the bakery. It just, the mass and scale feel off to me. And I'm wondering if you could take another pass at that. That's my comment.
Yeah, thanks for that.
You
So I
bet.
think that corner where I think the current parking is now, if that could be sort of an urban park, it would be more successful on a daily usage for the public than, having something up on the roof.
Yeah, that it unfortunately makes that corner read as a 4-story structure, which is one of the problems. I'm with Jared. I think we should also discuss our design guidelines and this building with respect to our design guidelines.
So before we get into that, I think, again, we're focused just on bigger concepts. I do want to do a time check. We do have another pretty important topic to discuss
Yep.
tonight, and it's 6:45. So we're about 20 minutes over on this agenda item. So maybe some quick comments to wrap up and give these guys some feedback so that we can move on to the next rather meaty discussion.
Well, I really want to put these forward.
Okay.
We have a very good set of design guidelines, and what they ask is that new buildings are sympathetic and reflective of our older buildings, so that we create a more cohesive vocabulary as you walk down Main Street. And given just the architecture of this building in my opinion, it's more suited to Willits than to downtown Carbondale. Our guidelines are pretty clear in what we're looking for in new infill. And there's some really good examples right across the street. They're large new brick buildings, but they're very, in terms of architectural vocabulary, sympathetic to the older work. And some of the sightings are pretty clear. You know, storefronts on the first level, proportioned double hung windows on the upper levels. Separation of the main and upper levels is usually defined by some horizontal design element, a cornice between the first floor and second floors. And that would be at the 14-foot level. And then finally, a prominent decorative cornice capping the facade. It continues to say it wants a tall ceiling on the first floor. In this language, it says, in no case shall the first floor be less than 18 feet in height as defined by zoning. And then, and I think that it's a really interesting problem for us, all of us, to design an appropriate 21st century building in this 19th century fabric. What it asks is a challenge. I don't think see it as a limitation, but it's a challenge of us designers to think innovatively of how to respond to the older fabric and come up with something that is compatible and sympathetic. And almost background, the building contents. You want to have this continuous fabric of building along our historic commercial core. It's really critical. And this building does not do that. It really is so different in how its floors are divided.
I'm just curious, this is what you're referencing for across the street?
I'm sorry, what?
This is what you're referencing for what looks historic across the street, just so we have a good reference.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely has windows that are in the back. And I don't need to get into the explanation.
Yeah,
But those are I think, more sympathetic than what's being proposed in front of us in terms of amount of mass and window proportioning. But in any case, I don't see this as being part of Carbondale's fabric. And I think it needs to be really studied from our guidelines and the historical perspective with which you're asking to put this building in. So that's my take on it.
All right, you got your work cut out for you guys.
Well, we appreciate the time this evening to look over this and your comments. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And yeah, thanks for coming in at this point. And I think it's really important that we get, this level of feedback and interaction early on so that we don't get too far down that road.
If you want to do more of a public, I guess, amenities, put that in your narrative and really explain what you want to do and how it's going to work in your application.
Like your willingness to step back from Main Street as opposed to those two other buildings, which were right up and against the zoning wall. I think
Sure.
Even if you can create some public spaces within those step backs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where's my cheat sheet? The next action item are a workshop and initial conversations about design guidelines for Old Town residential.
I mainly wanted to start tonight with sort of a open discussion of kind of how you guys got to where we are with wanting to develop these new guidelines for the Old Town Residential Zone District. And also kind of touch on some of those bullet points that I sent out in my little agenda. But I'm hoping for kind of an open conversation, just to get a sense of where you're all coming from, what you're looking for from the new guidelines, and what you see the big issues and big challenges of going forward are. But also I wanted a chance to get to know you personally. And I guess I could start with myself. I've been an architect in the Valley since the mid 1980s and run my own architecture firm, as well as doing a lot of historic preservation work. I served on the Aspen HPC for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years or something like that, and was involved in the Aspen Modern program when it first started, and and several guidelines revisions, as well as the residential design standards and some of the commercial core guidelines. So even beyond historic preservation concerns. And I actually was the staff for the Carbondale HPC back in 2000, in that realm, when the initial ordinance was written, and tried to sort of navigate that moment of trying to get historic preservation on the agenda and in the minds of the rest of the community. So that's sort of, and of course I wrote the original design guidelines document. So I'm happy to hear everything you have to say about that, and we'll work to make it better. You want to just do a quick tour?
Mark?
Maybe go around and introduce yourself.
I'm Mark Mahoney.
We've known each other for a long time.
Yes, 30 years or so. So,
Yep.
John Williams, we met when we were with Jay Harrington over at the Thompson House Museum,
Oh, yeah.
when we were trying to figure out how to fix that.
Yep. Still on the work list.
And that's still on the table as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
Eric Dowd, and I am one of the few folks around here that is a trained classicist. I studied Vitruvius and did my graduate work in Italy. So,
Uh-huh.
and have an architectural practice that is full range, all the way from dog houses to small towns. So. Been at it long enough to have sat on both sides of this line, and enjoy the role of both. But I'm very sympathetic to Carbondale, because it's where my folks lived when I was born. And it took me 30 years of struggling in the Central Valley to get back home, and I'm really glad to be here. So.
Heather McDonald, I know you from when we were across the hall in Staines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then now I work for Garfield County as a planner.
Oh, really? Really? Great.
Meredith Bullock, I'm the new kid on the block. I just joined the board, so I'm learning.
Jess Peterson, we know each other.
Yep, for a long
architect in
time.
town. Born and raised in the valley. I probably grew up in, 13 houses in the West End. And, sort of saw Aspen evolving
Yeah.
into the historic movement, so.
And I think, I will say that my approach to these guidelines isn't to replicate Aspen or any other community. I mean, there's certainly cues that we can take from other communities, but I'm hoping that in the end, the document will really reflect Carbondale and what Carbondale wants the document to be. So even though I'm pretty highly tied to Aspen, it's not like I'm gonna try to make this into an Aspen document, so. All right, well, let's just start with what were the things that sort of triggered your desire to expand the guidelines into the Old Town residential zone?
Well.
Thanks to Mark. We had a project in Old Town Residential that really, I think, lit a lot of fires and realized that Old Town needed a level of review, design review that currently wasn't happening. So there was one particular project in particular that spurred the gathering of 22 neighbors to come together and realize that, yes, in fact, we do need some design review and guidelines to help us deal with infill in that particular case.
Was it size or
It was
architectural design?
interesting.
Or-
It met all of the quantitative
Mhm.
aspects in terms of setbacks and but it was just this huge box that line or zoning to zoning allowances and lacked and to Janet's credit, she admitted that it hadn't met the quantitative and the qualitative aspects. And then the applicant unfortunately was given a building permit and the citizens got together and questioned the city, the town's issuance of that. And the town rescinded the building permit. And then the applicant argued that, well, how can you do that? Because this is qualitative considerations and undefinable.
Was there any review process beyond the building permit review process that was involved in that approval?
No, it was just staff and building permit review.
And I think what we found frustrating was that the only, what we're calling qualitative standards was in the Old Town residential purpose statement, which was very vague. It talked about the unique scenic, historic, natural, and design features that should be preserved and integrated into new development. And that special emphasis shall be placed on the quality and character of the built environment in this district and the unique lot and home sizes characteristic of the original town site.
Yeah, how do
It's
you
like-
make an approval based on that?
What does that mean? And
How do you make a denial based on
Yeah,
that?
exactly.
so I bring that up. But it was, I think it shined a light on the fact that there is no other standards other than the qualitative, setbacks, heights, lot coverage, those things. And I think what, at least from my point of view, is I would like to come out of this with some kind of, even if it's just dealing with massing, and site location, things like that.
Mhm.
Just something more than what we've got now that we can say, you know. I mean, I went through every lot, every house. I went to the assessor's office. I got the house size, the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, the lot size, whether it was 1, 2, 3 masses, all these things. And there were a couple of common characteristics throughout the district. You know, and I would think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah,
would be to
Love to see that.
look at that. You know, at some point, and I have the most average house in the world, I call it. It's just a you know, gable, 24 by 60 feet long. something
It's
like
Margaret
that.
and Frank's old house.
Margaret and Frank's old house. So, but where was I gonna go with that?
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see that analysis that you did.
Yeah, so the analysis, so at some point, when it gets to a certain size, because there are a few houses like that, John has one like that, Dick and Rita have one, you know, it's a common
Mhm.
Carbondale thing. But at like, I think it was 1,400 square feet, that was the last time it was a single mass, then it got to be multiple masses.
Mhm.
And, you know, the other thing is going up a flight, there were no examples of houses that had the same footprint on the second floor as the first. They all got smaller as they went up. So, I mean, those are, you know, if we're looking for, you know, characteristic features of that district, I mean, that's kind of what I would be interested
Yeah.
in examining.
It's always a challenge fighting that envelope or the volume, you know, what's in the code in terms of allowable volume of the
Mhm.
building and trying to manage that through guidelines. So it's going to be, you know, I think the ideal situation is that we would be able to have some input on what that allowable volume, you know, what those quantitative numbers are. Because at some point, you're just never going to be able to design your way out of something that's just too big for the zone district. But that's just for down the road discussion. When I looked at the map and kind of overlaid the survey work that we did back in the 2000s, I think, there were only a handful of actual historic buildings remaining in the Old Town Residential. I think there are 6 or 7 total in the whole area. And I don't know if you've looked at the impacts of the new development in that zone district on those particular sites or the pressure of redevelopment on those sites. Is that something that you've felt or talked about at all?
Yes, I kind of look at this project from the historic point of view. I'm not an architect. I leave that up to all these other people. I'm not an urban planner either. So I look at the houses and the few historic homes that we have, and they're classic, really classy looking homes. And it is a zone district called Old Town Residential. And then as I'm walking around town, I see some very super modernistic architecture styles coming up, and more of them. And any of the new construction is always pretty much a brand new architectural style. I've been told that we can't legislate style, but I just don't agree with that. You were sitting through the previous deal with downtown historical commercial core. I think if we're going to have a zone district called Old Town, we need to be able to at least help. We need to hold a style kind of thing, at least make it, like Eric said, it's hard to build in the 21st century to a 19th century deal, but that's basically what I would like to see done in Old Town. So that's kind of from my point of view. My second deal is ADUs. Old Town OTR has some very I feel super restrictions against building ADUs and specific rules and whatever that kind of make it really difficult to build an ADU in Old Town as opposed to any of the other zone districts. And I'd really like to see OTR brought up to be at least equal with the rest of the town as far as accessing ADUs, so that we can, so that the homeowners in town can benefit from this massive population growth we seem to be going through, instead of just the big buck developers that can afford to build stuff like we were just talking about.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
Jared, I kind of updated that bullet letter that I put together. Would it be appropriate to spread it around? Okay. Because it suggests after a conversation.
Kim won't get it, but I'm sure she's read it once or twice.
Oh, we forgot to introduce Kim to me.
Hi, Susanna. I
Hi.
wanted to meet you for many years.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
I have enjoyed
I don't know where you are.
really combing through all of your structure of merit work, and I've had an interior design business for about 25 years, and I just really appreciate all that you've done for the town so far. So I'm really looking forward to working with you on this. It's so important to us. So we're excited.
Thank you. Great.
So this is kind of my personal take on what we should be doing, and of course it should get amended by all, but at the end of the day, the Old Town residential overall goals, the big bullet points would be to get on the books a required courtesy design review for structures. And we probably need to talk about what would trigger a commission review before the commission versus just a staff review and size for that.
Before you move on, do you think there's any chance, any appetite for making it more than a courtesy review?
Yes, but the question is, will the larger community carry that? And that's where we look to you to really help us see how far we can take that review.
Okay.
One conversation we did have with a couple trustees that I've had was for the ADUs, we're talking about there's a lot of lots in Old Town Residential that you currently cannot build an ADU on because the lot size is too small. Right now it's a special use by review, making that just a permitted use and really opening up the floodgate for ADUs. But one of the council trustees suggested, well, you're giving a lot, maybe you should get something.
Yep.
And that question is do we have a mandatory review for ADUs? And they would be required to get our approval before they could issue a building
Yeah.
permit.
I think that's an excellent carrot and stick opportunity that we don't have a lot of otherwise. So that would definitely be high on my list of suggestions.
Yeah. So the other thing we really need is to get we have, at least two, well, we have three. We have the historic guidelines, we have the UDC, and then we have Chapter 16, which is our enabling legislation. And we need some referencing in the UDC to bring us back to our design guidelines so that people that are doing the planning understand the submission requirements for projects in historic core and hopefully as well as Old Town residential. So that's a big piece of the puzzle.
Can I
Yeah.
add a document to?
Pardon?
Can I add a document to that?
Yes.
The comp plan.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then,
There were these infill guidelines created by Tim Malloy back in 2000 as well.
Yeah, I kind of looked those over a little bit.
yeah, this is a good document.
Yeah.
It's Town of Carbondale infill guidelines and review criteria.
They haven't really been.
And it's good base document. And then specifically some criteria for the ADUs. And so that right now there's some real restrictions on ADUs. We want to look at again loosening those rules, but to what degree do we do that? And we definitely want to maintain our kind of historic fabric of the neighborhoods.
There's always a trade-off because again, you're adding density and there's already a lot of potential density on the site. So how we create that calculation is going to be key.
Yeah. So we need some help.
Your number 2 kind of brings up this issue of the appropriate architectural style. And I think that's one really threshold question for me is that there's sort of, historic preservation design guidelines are intended to protect historic buildings and the historic character of the neighborhood. The kind of purely character guidelines or residential design guidelines are kind of a different animal. When you try to kind of pass off those residential design guidelines as being historic preservation design guidelines, I think the public pretty quickly sees through that. So I think we need to start off and be very clear about, are we making a document to protect historic buildings and historic neighborhoods, or are we making a document that's going to be residential design guidelines that's going to kind of impose a character on a neighborhood? And I think we have to sort of always test, are we actually making a decision that's going to affect a historic character, or are we making a decision that's about a more broadly residential character? And it's a hard line to kind of navigate. But we went through this with the Aspen residential design guidelines and had all kinds of big meetings and discussions about it, to find elements of design like massing, like breaking down massing into components, like having a front porch or a front, a distinctive addressing the street character that is true about historic buildings, but isn't necessarily trying to make new historic looking buildings. So as we go through the process, I just want to kind of be aware that as we talk about it, that we're actually touching the historic preservation point as well as just the more general residential design point, and be clear about what goes into what bin. I probably didn't explain that very well, but as we start going, I think it'll be clearer to kind of see the difference between those things. So I just want to kind of put that a little bit of a warning and a little bit of a, you know, also to focus on what we're really trying to accomplish. Either one of those is fine, but they're different documents, or they're different goals, I guess. One is preserving historic buildings and preserving and creating new architecture that is complementary and recognizing of the historic buildings. But then if you have a block that has no historic buildings on it, you're really just talking about community character.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I see sort of what you've done already. There's been so many examples of residential architecture and additions and, you know, working with the historic buildings. And I sort of see that chapter 4 being about new buildings in that OTR zone district.
Yeah.
And maybe tuning up some of the residential illustrations, or pointing those out a little bit more so that we don't have another one of these.
Right.
But maybe it's all in one, and the criteria for additions and restorations is already in here, and we embellish it, and the new buildings are in that chapter 4. I mean, that's a simple way of maybe starting out.
Yeah. And I think we need to go back, you know, when I looked at the map and looked at the buildings that had been part of the survey, there were very few of those remaining in the OTR, but I think there are easily twice as many buildings that are actually historic buildings in that zone district that haven't really been identified or researched or, you know, surveyed. So that's another thing that I think is an important component of developing the new document. So when we go to the public, we can say, yeah, you know, there actually is historic character that we're trying to preserve.
Yeah, one of my concerns is right now we have a plaque program for structures of merit. And the only buildings that are eligible for the plaques are buildings that have been officially surveyed. And there's a whole set of buildings that we haven't been able to afford the consulting to do the research on, but there's a whole set of buildings that are historic that we can't plaque because they haven't been designated structures of merit.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's work to do, and I'm curious, you know, your thoughts on how to. Well, I guess we're confined to the Old Town residential as a zoning district, but if you have thoughts beyond the district, you know, and for future work for us, it would be insightful.
Yeah. There was at one point talk of doing a survey of the log kind of era, and was that ever carried out?
No.
The next step, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the next step, and then next step after that is the log cabin survey, and somewhere we're going to throw in the Thompson house.
You got the order a little backwards. But we do need to hurry for the log structures because we just lost one on Main Street.
Yeah.
888 Main is just a big hole in the ground now. We looked that up, and that was in 1895 it was built, I believe.
Yeah, is that where the Forest Service, what, that area, or is
No.
that different?
800 block of Main,
Okay.
west of 8th Street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unfortunately, it takes some big losses to make anything happen.
Yeah,
So,
person. Yes. Okay,
yeah,
So-
I'm happy to look beyond, kind of strategize about where we go after the OTR and kind of how we sort of work towards figuring out how to create benefits that will encourage people to go through design review process.
so what do you see as the next step to catch the temperature of public sentiment in terms of strengthening our design review ability?
Well, I think we have to be very strategic about when we introduce things to the public. We have to have enough information on paper and enough potential, enough guidelines that we're going to put out there so that it isn't just a freak out that, oh my God, you're infringing on my private property rights. So that we kind of create a level of trust that this is what we're focused on, this is what we're talking about. And not not determining paint color of your house or, those sort of things. So I think we need to go far enough to give people a certain comfort level that we're not trying to overstep. But at the same time, we have to go not so far that it's already set in stone that they feel like they're contributing to the conversation. So I think that that's going to be a little bit by feel. I'd like to get at least a chance maybe to walk around with all of you. I walked around with the staff earlier this year and talks more specifically about things that you're seeing in the neighborhood. We can sort of start with some of the stuff that's already existing in the guidelines and see how that might be kind of shifted into the OTR. And I guess I'd like to get a clearer understanding of what you think are the sort of the biggest issues, the biggest impacts that you see in those neighborhoods right now, and how we kind of craft something that would help mitigate that. And then go through a couple of series of maybe putting out some guidelines to you guys and sort of testing those out. And again, against what's already out there, would this guideline have solved that problem? Or would this guideline have created a different problem? And so that we can kind of hone in on what the key elements are that we're trying to manage through the guidelines. And then once we kind of get to a place where we're comfortable with that, then I think we're probably ready to go forward with more public discussion.
You think we're gonna probably make it around July or August?
Yeah, I
Meeting?
would say probably fall of next year. Yeah, fall of 25. I think I forgot to bring my schedule that I laid out in the original proposal, but
I think the original proposal had kind of a little bit of a midwinter break
mhm,
and then kind of ramping things back up in the late winter, early spring, and then
yeah,
maybe some initial public outreach, early summer, kind of to fall
yeah.
timeframe. So
Because as soon as you say to people that you're writing guidelines, everybody goes to the absolute worst case scenario. People will do that anyway, but the more we can kind of hone down that group that's going to freak out, I think the better we are. Give people some comfort level with what we're doing.
I've had a couple interesting conversations already. I don't know what to say and what not to.
Yeah.
So I want to make this document easy to read for the average person, because I don't think the average resident understands what's going on half the time.
Yeah,
And you need to explain it for all the architects too, a lot easier for them, because look at, they came in today trying to do this 42-foot and they didn't really read the code or read the design guidelines or anything, it seemed
Yeah.
like.
yeah, unfortunately. It was, I used up my whole paper of notes about what I thought about that proposal.
And what did you think?
I thought I mean, frankly, a rooftop garden seemed like a strange thing to propose as the driver for the massing of that building. It's like, what's the hidden agenda there? Because they're trying to get something. They're not just making a rooftop garden because they think it would be nice. And every resident of that building is going to complain the first 2 weeks that the public is up there on their roof, and they're going to change the rules for who can go up there and when. And it just seemed like seemed very odd to me that they would even propose it.
The imagery, what were?
Oh, yeah. And there were
your
plenty,
Impression of the imagery.
it was terrible. And there were plenty of design solutions. There are plenty of design solutions that I could come up with sitting in my chair over there that would have solved that problem, this big mass on the corner and, having to do this elevator there are just so many other ways to solve that problem. And yeah, I just didn't get it.
I was
Right.
trying to figure out if it's supposed to be ivy crawling on the side of the building.
Yeah, right.
Like
Yeah.
when everybody else has murals on their side of the building in downtown here.
Well, thank you for those comments.
Yeah, so, yeah, I was just always trying to figure out, they didn't present it particularly well, but you can't really teach that. And I was just really surprised, like, why are they even doing it?
Susanna, you're
It's-
saying what we're all thinking. It just felt like, and I'm not trying to be a jerk, but it felt like some young architects designing something that they thought would be cool,
Yeah,
but that had nothing to do with what the town feels is appropriate. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Well, Jared and I had a brief discussion and felt that people were looking at the distillery maybe as precedents to
Oh.
do some of the things, that for instance, in the Clay Center. And,
That's only 2 stories, isn't it?
and that's nothing that we were all privy to. Maybe, Kay, maybe you were in on that discussion about the distillery. But I'm sure they went through some sort of review. For you.
yeah, and I don't know whether they were cramming in an extra floor or,
It was clearance for the elevator on the 3rd floor.
yeah. But are there penthouses that are gonna open onto this garden? I mean, that would.
Problem is they
put-
didn't have floor plans, so we didn't know exactly what was gonna be on the
Yeah.
3rd floor. I think it's supposed to be residential according to the narrative. But it said like it was 2 commercials,
So
retail on the 2nd floor too.
let's focus on
Yeah.
the OTR as opposed to that
Well, it
application.
brought up some questions for me.
But I think as context for how the design guidelines maybe, how the existing design guidelines are being utilized. I know that's one of the things, Susanna, in your application or in your letter, sorry. I think it's a very recent example. And so it helps, when you guys use the design guidelines and Eric, I think you were doing a lot of pulling out specific citations. Do you find that the current guidelines are helpful when evaluating applications? Or there are certain aspects of the existing design guidelines that could be done differently or looked at or written in a different way that might be more effective
Yeah.
for applicants, for us, for you guys to kind of utilize when reviewing applications? And I think that's certainly a topic worth, and maybe just curtail how much of that specific project we're talking about and more the concepts of the discussion might be good.
And I guess to extend that would be, what if compliance with the guidelines became a condition of some of these alternate solutions? You know, would that be something you'd be willing to live with in the HCC zone? So if they want to take advantage of alternate compliance, would requirement to go through your review the review. So you'd give them a little something, a little bit of height, a little something in exchange for actually being able to do a binding review on the project. Is that something you'd be willing to live with?
That's
Yeah.
something that has been discussed quite a bit. is,
Yeah.
Is there some relief from zoning? Maybe it's permeable, impermeable percentage
Mhm.
on some of these houses.
Yeah,
If they can, abide by some of our comments, which currently don't have much,
right,
any teeth.
yeah,
It's a courtesy review.
Right.
So even, their next review,
They can ignore us and
they
just
can
do
ignore
whatever.
us like
yeah.
some
And
other people
it
do.
doesn't sound like, in a commercial building like that, they have to go through another level of review
Correct.
with the, is that trustees or is it?
Depending, planning commission at a minimum,
Uh-huh.
potentially trustees as well.
Yeah, but maybe it's even enough to have your comments considered in the context of that
Mhm.
review.
Yeah, Jared, I would think we would want to know that where they are in their submission process. And for us as a commission to draft a letter of response that would go to the planning commission.
So with that last application, they haven't submitted anything. There is
Right.
no, but yeah, I think kind of in alignment with what Susanna is bringing up. With a courtesy review, we always summarize, we include the minutes of the meeting for consideration by the Planning and Zoning Commission and or the trustees, depending on where that goes. But, if there's a desire from the community and from the decision makers that potentially an alternative compliance request in one of these zone districts requires a binding review, I think the process would be significantly different. The process would include a lot of the staff review that we do now, scheduling probably a public hearing with this commission so that the public's aware of it,
Mhm.
and then have that formal review, draft up written binding agreements, whether that's, a resolution of approval or denial or whatever that might be. So I think there would be a little more kind of government process and also teeth and follow through with those binding reviews, if that is something that the community has an appetite for. But certainly I think it's worth discussing. Is the carrot worth the extra review hurdle? And is that something that the whether it's OTR, HCC, one or both, I think it's worth having that conversation.
When we get to around public engagement, we need to be well versed in what we need to talk about and how to have answers for any kind of questions that
Yep.
might come up with the public.
Yep,
So we probably need a couple more work sessions of what are we going to be talking about on this
yeah.
public engagement?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that the public trusts, you guys develop some trust with the public. And part of that is being able to speak clearly and, respond to their concerns in a knowledgeable way. So that is a
Well,
big part of it.
the interesting thing is 1, 2, 3, 4 members of this board live in Old Town Residential. We have
Yeah.
pretty good.
5.
Hey, Kim, hi.
Part of the commission, I promise.
Susanna knows I'm here. I'm not.
So yeah, and it's a great neighborhood. They really, it's fabulous. So I'm hopeful.
Well, Susanna, you bring up a really, really good point because one of the things that we've run into time and again, even just with trying to do this plaque program, is people are terrified that we're going to step on their toes and that we're going to run their lives and, you know, tell them every little detail of what they can do with their homes. So I think the point that you're making regarding trust is really important. And, you know, Heather's point about simplifying the language and Eric's point of one of our biggest goals is to make this accessible where people can go between the design guidelines and know how to refer over the UDC and just simplify things and make them approachable, but also, like we're all saying, is have some teeth. So I think this has been a great conversation to start us off with you for sure.
Great.
Okay.
Speaking of plain language, there's one that I ran into in the comp plan that I don't understand. I don't know what it is. What is form-based? So consider form-based residential infill development standards or form-based code language. What's it mean?
More massing. It's the massing of buildings mostly.
Yeah,
Stepping back on the second floor.
Yeah.
zoning.
Form-based, what's the
Well-
form of the building?
Yeah, zoning typically in the past is tried to zone use. And this is avoiding use and talking about just the building massing more than anything else.
One of the comp plan historic HPC mandates has those two in it. There's, I think, 4 or 5 points in that relate to the UDC and HPC.
Yeah,
Form-based residential infill development standards
yeah.
and form-based code language that places emphasis on something or other, are the
Yeah.
two that were flags for me.
So how most other towns do form-based codes is they take like a small section and it's like combined design guidelines and code, if that makes sense. So it would be an amendment to the UDC. And it works differently than traditional zoning. Like, I guess I'm not good at explaining it. Where, yeah, it dictates form instead of like mass and volume. So you can dictate things if you want, like paint color, but you know, most don't go that in depth. You can do things like, oh, you have to have a cornice, you know, you have to have front porches, that sort of stuff. If that helps. So
Yeah.
it's a way of combining the two.
Yeah, I kind of try to say, you know, zoning generally has 3 kind of 2 to 3 main components that dictate what you can build. You have the height, the top, the setbacks, the sides, and then how much within that box you can fill lot coverage. Form-based zoning kind of takes a different approach. It says, well, we're less concerned about the height, the box, the overall lot coverage, and what we're more concerned about is how these massing elements are placed within that. And so it focuses more on things like portions of your lot frontage can be a building, or you need to have these types of building elements on the first floor. Your second floor has to step back, step in, so that you create these forms that are larger first floors, smaller second floors. Some go as far with code saying the second floor can only be 50% of the square footage of the first floor, as an example. Other kind of form-based elements may discuss architectural features like, you know, certain types of roof styles or pitches. You know, the form has to have one predominant roof element versus a lot of different ones, or vice versa. And so it really focuses less on what's your setback, what's your lot coverage, and how are those elements really put together to create that built form? Does that
That
kind of help?
feel. Sort of the feel of the.
Yeah, it's a little more of the feel. So it tries to kind of take zoning, which is 35 feet, check, 10-foot setbacks, check, 50% lot coverage, check, and focuses more on those feel kind of elements.
Subjective.
Yeah. Hopefully that helps, Meredith.
Thanks.
What we need is the cliff notes that combines all that stuff, so
Yeah.
us normal people can understand it.
I'm glad we have a normal person here.
You know, you don't have to have a college degree in architecture or urban planning in order to figure this stuff out.
So any more comments? No?
No.
Well, thank you thank you for accepting the job. You know, I think it's a great fit. Yeah. Is there conference going on?
Okay, so my job as planner is to understand the calendar. The next meeting would be the 2nd of January. So I just wanted to take the temperature to see if people still wanted to have a meeting that day, or if people will be out of town for the holidays.
I have work that day. So
What's the consensus?
I'm here.
I'm fine.
I'll be here.
I'm here. Jared, are you here?
So I will be here, correct. Yeah, so we can have a meeting on the 2nd. I don't know if we want to discuss some more of these topics, whether you're here or not. We can kind of have a conversation and feed you some information if that would be helpful. Or if there's other kind of questions or comments that you
Yeah, I'm sure
that you
there'll
have
be-
for the HPC, we could leverage another meeting to kind of talk about some of these goals of the project, if that works for you all.
Is that something you'd like to do?
Or we could potentially, I know it's midwinter, January, coldest, we could do a site walk with Susanna, if you guys want to kind of devote the meeting to a site walk of the OTR.
That's,
Obviously, I think we would pick a different time than 6 PM on a,
well, and it would
on
be
a
weather
Thursday, but
dependent.
if that is something you guys want to do and do have availability during the daytime, I
Yeah.
think we can
maybe.
schedule that meeting and have that, and fully knowing that maybe not everyone would be able to attend, but just throwing kind of all ideas out the
Yeah.
window.
I can see if I can get off at like 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and just take a half day off just to do this. It's not gonna be
Yeah.
easy.
Yes,
It would keep things moving forward. I think.
yes, I think, yeah, we should get the ball rolling.
Okay,
So what we can do is we can kind of we can work together, see what times and
yeah,
might be best for this, and we can throw that out to you all.
And the
Just-
weather forecast.
Let us, yeah, weather forecast, it's gonna be sunny and
yeah, 60 degrees.
Yeah, that's
yeah, that number. And you know what, if it's an absolute terrible day and we have to cancel and reschedule, we can do that.
We can
But
do that.
we'll at least work on kind of a daytime plan, and then we can notice that hearing in case other people would like to participate, observe, whatever that might be.
Do you have access to one of the vans that Parks and Rec has one on?
We could most certainly get access to a van if
Yeah.
that's a preference.
That
Yeah.
might be mitigate the weather.
Yeah, we can try to do that. I don't know if you guys want to ride in a car I'm driving, but luckily we have a lot of other better drivers. Oh, okay.
Local van.
Well, if the weather is nice
Honor.
and the roads are not icy, I would prefer to walk.
Yeah, walk or bike.
Yeah,
Well, and if we
Mandatory
need to do it,
cycles.
it's not a big district.
no, but if we need to, go toward the end of January instead of the beginning, just to have a little more daylight and drier roads possibly,
Yeah.
that would be fine.
Yeah, yes.
So we might want to think about that.
Okay.
Because the second is probably one of the darker days.
Yeah, very fair.
Here on the February, or are you skipping March?
I'm skipping March.
Maybe we should just do the February one if it's.
March is the snowiest month.
Yeah, the other, what is February's meeting? The first Thursday in February, that day.
Yeah.
Kim, the 6th? That would be another option we could look at. So if maybe
Yeah, if it gets
if
postponed.
January 2nd is an option because it's too dark and daytime
Mhm.
doesn't work for everyone, we could look to that February 6th date and do something similar, kind of daytime,
would be
early
the-
afternoon.
That would be
Might-
the backup date.
Okay.
So we would start like at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and walk around.
Yeah.
We can certainly try that.
O'clock would be late. I think.
But yeah, 3
Noon,
might.
1:00.
1 o'clock. Yeah. Yeah,
For both dates or for January or?
Well, that's when I walk my dogs. That's the best time.
1 o'clock?
Cause it's warm and the chances that the ice melting are better.
Tentatively, January 2nd at 1. Okay.
so have we got a staff report tonight?
We're working with Susanna on the OTR design guidelines. I don't think there's really much else to update on. I can't think of anything else. You know, what I think January's meeting will largely depend on whether we have this walk. If we don't, I think the February meeting would. I don't think we have any other pending applications that we know about for HPC review. So, you know, this would kind of be that focus.
All right.
And if you get a chance, I would be interested in if you go through the existing document and kind of mark it up. If you have thoughts about things that, you know, doing your courtesy reviews, if things don't work or something's missing, or just any kind of thoughts that you've had interacting with the document would be helpful.
Meredith, we expect you to be the expert on that.
Proofread the spelling. I like the building form and massing is really, for downtown, it's really interesting. The language is great.
Yeah. It's a good document.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, good.
Architectural detailing and so on.
Yeah, I just wish people would read it.
Always the challenge.
It's black and white. Nobody reads black and white anymore.
Well, it's printed in black and white. It's in color too. It's not?
No, most
No.
of the pictures are in black and white. The only
Yeah.
thing colored is actually the logo on there.
I printed it in black and white. No, there's some stuff I printed.
Is there
We can work on that.
a motion to
Well,
adjourn?
I got the,
Randy said if we wanted
Or
to
a
redo the
joke.
logo,
I
he's
got
fine with
the
it.
last of the
These are
2024
Well,
plaques
some are,
installed
but a lot of it is black and
over there on
white.
the
Same
south
thing.
side of
Thanks.
Thompson House Museum.
Not printed.
So the 2025 is now open for taking applications for more plaques. Of course, we won't get them done till next year, but that's, we got those all done.
Nice. So that could be something that we'll queue up for a future meeting of 2025 program, kind of chat about that and get you guys feedback before moving that forward.
Yeah, it was quite an experience pushing that through Parks and Rec.
Yeah, you did great work getting that. And it looks great over by the jail.
Yeah. And thanks to our digger Dowd over here.
Mano y mano.
Those mottos.
I got tools too.
Okay, that's it.
And I have pictures
Okay.
of every single structure of merit. Color pictures of what it looks like right now.
I move to it. Should we adjourn?
Is there a second?
I second.
Favor?
I
Bye.
I
Motion carried.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Kim.